Okay, in this last portion of the Photoshop introduction tutorials, and these are by no means covering Photoshop comprehensively, they're just giving you an overview of how you can start using the program. What we're going to talk about are brushes, layers, so merging and flattening layers, and then lastly we're going to talk about actions, which is a good thing to know about early on so that you can start saving some of the techniques that you develop. So let's talk a little bit about layers. So in the previous example, we had created kind of a composite image from a background image that was taken from a camera, and then a series of layers that were added from information that we had gotten online. So these four now, in the Photoshop file, you want to keep all of these things so that you can start editing them. For some reason, if you didn't want the person in the drawing anymore, or if you didn't want the house in the drawing anymore, or the image anymore, you could have control over how those things start to work. If for some reason though I wanted these two images or these two layers to always be connected to each other, there's a couple of different things I could do. I could, number one, merge the layers, which turns them into one. So all of the information that used to be on both of those layers is now on one layer. But in Photoshop, you want to keep as many options open to you as possible. So I could also link the two layers. So if I right-click on them and if I select them and right-click, I could link them, which means that they're still independent. I can still turn one off versus the other. But when I select one or when I do something to one, the other goes with it, right? So this woman and her shadow are now linked, but I can still edit the layers independently. And then lastly, instead of linking them, so I'm going to unlink them, I can make a folder, a group of things, and call this, person 1, and put the woman walking and her shadow in that folder. And so now these can be controlled by the folder, and I can collapse that folder so in case I start getting into a document that has a lot of information in it, I can have it be more visually clear in terms of the layer palette. If for some reason I were never going to make any adjustments to this again and I wanted it all to be in one location, I could flatten the image, which takes all of the information from all of the layers and turns it into one layer. I can now no longer go back in and move people around and have the background. If I tried to move part of this house around, there's nothing behind it anymore. Everything's all on the same layer. So flattening images is kind of a last resort thing. You don't typically do that in Photoshop. When you save a Photoshop file out as, say, a JPEG or a TIFF file, it will flatten it in that version of the image file, but you'll always have your kind of fully adjustable Photoshop file to go back to. So don't flatten things is basically the rule of thumb. And I talked about grouping and I talked about linking, so those are good to know. And then you understand arranging things. So I could make layers, I could make things in front of or behind each other. So she's now behind the house. If I put this above and I bring her over, she's now in front of the house, right? So everybody understands kind of stack order at this point. We used in the previous portion of the tutorial a brush that has the shape of kind of grass. That's one that's really good to use, but we haven't really talked about what you can do with brushes. So the brush tool is here. The shortcut for it is B. There's also a pencil tool, color replacement tool, and a mixer brush tool. Those are ones that you can play around with on your own. But for general purposes, brushes are going to be important to use. So when I have a brush, I enter into it activates a series of options up here in the top command bar. So we pulled this out before, but you can start to look at it a little bit more closely. So this is the kind of brush adjustment tool, you might say. I don't know what its technical name is, but in here you can control the size, the hardness, and the shape of the brush. So the size is how big or small the image is. I need to go on a layer where I can draw something. So in here, if I make my brush enormous, or if I make it small, you can start to see by the size of the kind of circle around the cursor, it's bigger or smaller. You can go all the way down to 1 pixel. It becomes a little hard to see. And then in here, you have a series of different brush options, right? So you have kind of harder or softer brushes. You have brushes that have different shapes to them. So these are kind of mimicking brushes that you would get with watercolor or acrylic. And then you start to have ones that are like this that looks like speckles. So you can see, I'm going to make the brush size bigger. You can see that it's going to allow for you to create different textures. So instead of just cloning something, one-to-one in a round shape, I can select it here and then clone it over here to the side, right? And so it's going to give me a different kind of texture. It'll make it into a kind of a shape. You can kind of see that it's extruding it like as if you had a Play-Doh, those Play-Doh presses that you would squish out the shape that the kind of plate went in. But you can also, you need to be on the background layer. You can also select and then just click once and it will give you the kind of shape of that brush. So you can create kind of a speckled area. I'm going to go back and undo that. Make sure I'm on my background layer. Other types of shapes of brushes are the kind of blades of grass. You could do one in the shape of a leaf, which is good if you're adjusting things on trees. And you can play around with the rest of these. There are all sorts of different types of shapes. Here's one that's kind of pebbles would be a good pebbly shape. You can load brushes. So in here, I can load new brushes. Down here, there are some presets. This doesn't appear to have any presets in it. You can open some of these, so drop shadow brushes. You can open it and replace all the ones that are open, or you can open it and append, so it's going to add to that list. And drop shadows, we'll talk a lot about drop shadows. They're one of my least favorite things. But you can go in and you can play around with some of these other brush options. So open assorted brushes, basic brushes, faux finish brushes. That sounds scary. We don't really want to faux finish anything. Special effects brushes, let's see what those are. So these are flowers and butterflies and all sorts of crazy stuff. And you can also go online and search for brushes. So I can go in and load brushes. So I've previously searched online and found some brushes online that are free. And so you download the file for that. So these are high resolution grungy watercolor brushes. And they have a .abr extension. So when I load those in, you can see after the butterfly, I now have a series of kind of grungy watercolor brushes, whatever that means. At a higher size, when I use these, they're kind of making watercolor marks over the page, which could be interesting, right? Depending on the effect that you're going after. In this particular drawing, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but you can, I'm going to shrink this down a bit on my background layer. I'm actually going to make a new layer to do this onto. So new layer down here, a new blank layer. So as with all Adobe programs, this little icon with the corner turned up is new. So I'm going to make this bigger. I'm going to do this, not quite that big, a little bigger than that. And put this kind of grungy layer in on my new layer. And then I can take that layer and play with some of the layer styles, right? I can darken it, I can burn it, I can lighten it, I can multiply it, I can do all sorts of different types of things, and I can adjust the opacity, and whatever effect this might be achieving might be something that I want in my image. So I'm kind of adding some more artistic effects to it. So those are the ways that you make brushes. The last thing that you can do that we'll talk about right now is make your own brushes. So let's say I want to make the shape of this person and I want to make a bunch of her across the drawing. So I want to select everything that's on her layer. So I'm going to Control or Command A, and then if I shift my selection around a little bit, I just get the outline of her. And I had gone in on that layer and added some kind of ground so that she looked like she was in the ground, but I'm going to go in and deselect that. So this is the outline of the shape that I want. You could also select a letter, you can draw something freehand, but at in this point, you can now make your own layer. So I want to make a custom layer. So custom brush size, new brush preset, and it's going to be the I'm going to call it person outline. And oh, sorry, it's taken the one that was just previously selected. I need to make a new shape. Hang on just a second. Okay, so if you want to take this outline of a shape and turn it into a brush, you do that through Edit, Define Brush Preset, and you can see over here on the left now we have kind of a person-shaped brush. I'm going to call that Person 1. Hit OK. And now when I'm painting, I can choose that as a brush option down here at the bottom, and I can paint different, let's say I'm going to make it dark, hit OK. I can paint different people into my drawing. I've lost my panels here. Let's see, color and swatches. Where are my swatches? Oh my, here we go. So here's my properties over on the side. I want to and I need my layers, that's what I was going for. This is not cooperating. There we go. Layers, somewhere in here. Brushes, layers. So I'm going to be painting on the background layer and this woman walking, right? And for some reason it's not working very well. Let's see. Got my brush tool selected. It's normal mode, 100% opacity. The color that we should be painting is black. Oh, I have just her selected, that's why, I'm sorry. It's only letting me select, it was only letting me paint where she was selected. So now I can go in and make a bunch of her throughout the drawing. You have to be careful, you can, if you're not just clicking, you're creating a bunch of people. But that's how you create your own brush. And you can see that it took it didn't take the color, it will only take the tones of the color that are within that, the tone being how much black or white is in it. And then it'll turn that into a brush.